Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is the MCable by Marseille, or the Marseille cable, the gaming edition. Side note, there is a cinema edition. I don't really have much else to say about that. I don't own one. I did see a little demonstration of it, and it was very impressive, but the joke with that is, what's the difference between the two? Well, the gaming edition is red and the cinema edition is orange. They do have other slightly different algorithmic changes that actually do make this one better for gaming, while the other one is better for cinema, but I don't have it, so I can't really display it. Other than just to say, like, yeah, I saw it in person and yes, it was nice, but beyond that, we're mostly going to focus on this. So what is this thing? Well, it's an HDMI cable. Okay, I swear to you it's more exciting than that. Just stick around. Now, what this thing claims to do is that it's an HDMI cable, but a very fancy one. It's one designed to improve the image of basically anything you throw at it. You take one end of the cable and connect it to your game console and the other end to your television. The end you stick into the television has an additional little chip processor in it that does a lot of work. Now, that's actually the difference in size here. So if you take a look at the actual cable, you'll see that one is noticeably bigger than the other. Like I said, that's a special chip they built into this thing. What they told me is that there's a little processor inside, and this chip actually takes the time to redraw every single pixel on the fly, resulting in a cleaner image, kind of producing essentially an anti-aliasing effect for game consoles, which is impressive. The other thing you'll notice is there's a USB cable. That's one of the downsides of this thing, although really not that big of a deal, is that this cable, because of that chip, requires a power supply. Now, the USB cable can be plugged into any sort of USB port. I plugged it into various consoles for use. I plugged it into the television I have. I plugged it into like wall outlets. It worked just fine. I never really ran into a problem, save for one, but we'll talk about that later. First to note though, this thing is a little expensive. It retails for $120 US, and that is this particular one, which happens to be the 3-foot gaming edition. There's also a 6-foot and a 9-foot. Those are more expensive, but to be honest, I wish those were the ones I had, because I gotta say this right now, 3 feet is incredibly short for a gaming setup, so that was a little bit of an annoying hindrance. But then again, this is a review unit, so I can't be exactly upset about that. But I wanna tell that story a little bit first. Basically, my little backstory with these guys is they contacted me before E3 multiple times trying to get a hold of me and seeing if I wanted to come check out their booth. I did so at E3, and they showed me a pitch for this game. They basically said, look, here's 2 TVs next to each other. We're running Halo 3 on the Xbox 360. It's just being split to both TVs. One is using our cable, one is not. Feel free to play and let us know which one you think is better. Well, I didn't have to before I even just instantly noticed that the one running their cable was better. I mean, like, laughably better. It was really obvious how much smoother the image was. I was actually very impressed. And they said, feel free to change the cables around and prove to yourself that we're not lying to you, that it's some special TV or something. So I go ahead and I tinker, and sure enough, they're telling the truth. Like, the ones running with this cable was very impressive. So I actually went to a second event for them later, and they started showing the movie. Like, they showed Justice League with the cinema cable, and it was also, that's the other side note to the cinema cable, is yes, that one also has benefits as well. But to focus more on the gaming cable, because I developed a bit of a relationship with them, I wanted to help you guys out a bit. Like I said, the cable is kind of expensive, so I got you guys a little bit of a deal. If you use my name as a coupon code, I'll display it here, I'll also put it in the description, you can actually save 10% off of your order if you want to do that. It's just at their website, again, it'll be in the description, but feel free to get 10% off of your order. On top of that, if you feel like just trying your luck, if you put hashtag MCable in the comments, in addition to whatever else you want to say to me, you can also win a chance to enter, and you can enter to win a cable. They're going to be shipping out one to one lucky winner. So good luck, give it a shot. So now let's talk more about the actual cable. And yes, you can get your jokes out now about how I should have used the cable to actually film this video, because that would have helped clean up the picture. Haha, that is a good one. I'll give you credit for that. But moving on, let's talk about the cable. Now, the cable is very simple to use. As I said, the only catch is you have to have a USB source, and of course one specific side has to be plugged into your TV and the other cannot. There are a couple of other catches, if you want to call them that, or little hindrances. We'll talk about that at the end. But practically, how does it stand up? What did I connect it to? What's the deal? So first, I need you to understand something that's going to make this YouTube video feel more 2006 than it already does based on the video quality of my actual camera. But One problem I ran into is that I was not really able to properly capture video with this thing. They even talked to me about this when I met them, which was one of the problems with trying to present this thing on YouTube, is that you kind of can't do it very easily, because the best way to show anybody what this technology is capable of is to actually have two TVs next to each other. I kind of developed a little bit of a relationship with this founder and CEO, who actually is the guy who signed this thing for me. Thank you again. But yeah, he was kind of saying like that's a real issue, and they're not really sure how to go about showing it to people. And YouTube doesn't make it any easier, because even though you can do like side-by-side comparison stuff, you are outputting to a device which degrades the image a bit. You're capturing the device, editing the software, editing the footage, and then you're uploading the footage to YouTube, and it starts to chip away at the subtleties and making it less obvious how good it actually looks. So I went really back in time on this one. I'm going to show you photographs of the television comparing one to the other. I'm sorry in advance, but the reason I did that is because my capture software, maybe it was the hardware specifically, was actually having issues with this thing. Like, it would detect it, but it seemed like whatever additional benefits are in this thing would disable when I was trying to record it. And it wouldn't allow for a pass-through either, so I'll talk more about that at the end. So the only way I could really show you guys a very accurate comparison between the two is to be very inaccurate, and by just taking a photo of something and letting your naked eye be the judge. So I know it's a little ghetto, but that's what I had to do. So we'll get into that in a moment. But a couple other things I want to talk about this off the bat is basically one thing in particular I know a lot of people are going to be questioning right before we get into any of this, which is lag. What is the deal with the lag? Well, it has no lag. I experienced absolutely none. And if you don't believe me, feel free to check out other channels like Digital Foundry and stuff. They did videos on this thing, and even they determined not only does it have no lag, it actually runs a bit faster than your standard HDMI cable. So the point is, if lag is your big concern with this thing, because it has to redraw every pixel on the fly, trust me when I say that ain't an issue. That is not going to be a factor in your gaming experience if you have this thing. So let's talk about it in practical use. Most people, when they are looking at this thing, especially, I've seen a couple other channels where they're talking about this cable and what they want to see out of it. Most people are focusing on the newer content, which makes sense. Well, you guys know me, I'm more of a retro gamer than I am anything else, so I wanted to test some of that. So I'm gonna get this right out of the way. This thing really doesn't start to have any sort of effect until kind of the mid 5th generation consoles. For example, I tested the Sega Genesis. Now I have the Sega Genesis running through the 32X, through RGB, through a FrameMeister, through this thing. Take a look. And now take a look without it. Take a look with it. Take a look without it. Point is, and I'm not the only person who said this, this thing wasn't really designed for 2D content. It really wasn't designed for retro content in general. So it really has almost no effect, if any effect at all, in stuff really kind of predating, I'm gonna be honest, the Dreamcast. It did have a little bit of effect on certain 5th gen consoles. The next thing I tested, I upgraded from 4th gen to 5th gen, I went ahead and tested the Sega Saturn. Now I actually use Knights. Now Sega Saturn was never really a 3D intense console, but I wanted to give it a shot, so I started playing Knights a bit. Here's the cable with it, here's the Saturn with it, and here's the Saturn without it. Yeah, almost no difference at all. Again, and that even though it's at a flat angle like that, it is ultimately a 3D image. So I was surprised to see that it really had no effect there. A little disappointed, but not. I guess I can't really say I was surprised. I was hoping it would have an effect. I was disappointed in that. Moving on, the first time I noticed it though was the N64. Now here we have the N64 running with it and without it, but this one comes with a huge asterisk next to it. My N64 is RGB modified. It is then running through a FrameMeister, then running through this cable. The average N64 can't do any of that because it's not modified for RGB, and it's certainly not natively connected to a FrameMeister to do additional processing on it. If you have both of those things, like I do, then you will notice a difference, but even that difference isn't that huge. So like I said, this cable's not really designed for retro content and doesn't even start to be even remotely noticeable until 5th gen stuff, and that's only under certain conditions. Because then I moved up to the 6th gen. Now that's actually where I started to see things. And this is where most people aren't bothering to test this. First thing, of course, in release order, I tested the Sega Dreamcast. And it wouldn't be my channel this month especially if I didn't have some sort of Shenmue reference in here. But what I did is I ran Shenmue with it. Now I've got Shenmue running without it and with it. Now that's a pretty obvious difference to me. You can see a lot, like there's a lot less pixelization around his Ryo's legs and around his jacket. It's a lot smoother and a more buffed out image. It is definitely noticeable on a TV. And especially when you're doing a direct comparison there. But it must be said, the Dreamcast does not have native HDMI output. In order to use this, you had to have something like the Akura. Not that one by pound, I don't have that thing. I might do a video on it someday, but a lot of the reviews, and even people I have friends who have reviewed it, they all kind of say like it's really not that great. So if you want a good HDMI box, you want to go with Bahar Bros. Always go with Bahar Bros for stuff like that. They make the best things. But yeah, in this case, I ran it with the Akura and it looked great. But a big catch to the Dreamcast is, while most of its games run in 480p, this thing will benefit from those, but the 480i ones really will do nothing. But there's not that many of them anyway. But with that in mind, we move on to the Gamecube. Now the Gamecube, again, there was no HDMI version of the Gamecube, but I have an HDMI modified Gamecube. And again, most Gamecube games, in this case, only support 480i. So when 480i seems to be running through this thing, it seems like the additional benefits just shut off and it does nothing. I vaguely recall reading on their website that 480p is the lowest supported resolution. What that essentially means is not that it won't actually display something lower than that, it's just that it won't do any additional benefits to anything lower than that, which would make sense considering they don't claim it does anything to retro stuff. But the Gamecube through 480p, whole different story. I fired up Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. This is Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes running via a modified Gamecube with HDMI output straight to the board. This is the normal cable. This is the Marseille cable. You tell me you can't instantly tell that difference. It is amazing how much smoother the lines are around Snake in that image. It's insane. And to those who would ask, PS2 and Xbox, I do not own the HDMI cable for the original Xbox, the one by pound, so I can't test that. And I had a little PS2 HDMI adapter, but this little Chinese piece of junk, it broke a long time ago. It doesn't work anymore, so I can't test either of those, so I had to move on. But with the Dreamcast and the Gamecube, they both definitely see improvements, provided you have the ability to use them. The Dreamcast being more practical of the two, but then again, you could use the Gamecube with the GCHD and probably see very similar results. So moving on, we get into what this thing was really meant for. And you'll find that out really in the end. That's going to be kind of my consensus. You get into the 7th gen consoles. Now I fired this thing up with the Xbox 360. Specifically, I chose the game Ghostbusters. Love that game. Great game. Basically the 3rd movie. Fuck the 2016 movie. But anyway, so I fired up Ghostbusters. Here's without the cable. Here's with it. Now, it may not be overwhelmingly obvious, but if you start to actually pay attention to it for a second and look around the edges, you'll actually notice, yeah, wait a minute, it actually is very apparent that it's there. And just for the hell of it, I decided to also run, that game happens to be backwards compatible now with the Xbox One. I decided to throw it in there and then test the Xbox One with the same cable, specifically for the Xbox backwards compatibility. Please keep in mind, my Xbox One is an Xbox One S, not an Xbox One X. So the Xbox One is not doing any additional upgrades to the game itself. So this is just the results. Now here is, just for the hell of it, here's also a comparison between the MCable running on a 360 and MCable running on the Xbox One, both with Ghostbusters. Subtle difference at best. But the point is, with this cable, you can definitely see a difference between the 360 and the 360 without it. The same with 360 backwards compatibility with and without it. Then I moved on. Since we're on the Xbox 360, I guess we'll focus on that for the moment. I ran Dead or Alive 5 on it. This is Dead or Alive 5 running without it. This is running with it. It looks better, but it's not as glaringly obvious as it is with the 360. I also decided to run some additional Nintendo hardware on it. I threw the Wii U at it, got Sonic Lost World running on it, and you can see Sonic here. This is without it, and then this is with it. And he looks better with it. It's not as obvious to me, but it is good. But there, to be fair, I am basically photographing my television, and there could be better game examples than this. But the point is, it was obvious to me, and I could see it, that it was better. I also then tried it with the Nintendo Switch. The Switch was a very similar case where, again, it was pretty obvious to me that there was a difference. Again, here you have the very beginning of Super Mario Odyssey at the dashboard with Mario, like the close-up of his head. If you look particularly in the back, there's like a little stump of hair. If you look up on the upper right side, you can see that it's very smooth on the MCable version and not smooth on the other. It just kind of reduces a lot of the jagging, jaggies effect. That's essentially what the anti-aliasing is meant to do. It's just to kind of clean those type of things up. And you can notice it on the Wii U and the Switch. And then I decided to throw some Sony hardware at it. So I threw in the PS3 and the PS4. Now, both of them I ran into an interesting issue. And I apparently was not alone in this. I could not get either of them to work, at least not initially, and I didn't know what was up with that. I thought maybe there was HDCP issues or something like that. No, that's not the case. Upon looking this up, I've noticed that while the device straight up says on the box that it's PS3 and 4 compatible, it is with a certain annoying little quirk. And I only found out about this on like a Reddit post. But basically, other people were having the exact same problem, where basically you connect it and it just does nothing. The TV displays nothing, nothing happens. Well, it turns out that's a power issue, somehow. So when you have the cable plugged in, you're supposed to have the USB power supply on. Once you've turned on the PS4, you have to then, after a moment, disconnect the USB power supply and reconnect it. It will reconfigure and then start working on the PS4. Great. And the same thing goes for the PS3, except with the PS3 you have to do it twice. You have to basically, disconnect it once you boot up the PS3, reconnect it, and it will launch to the XMB, the dashboard. Then once you launch your game, the same exact problem is going to occur, so you have to disconnect it and reconnect it again, then your game will work. I don't know what to pin that on. Obviously, it is some sort of issue with the cable, though it doesn't seem everyone suffers that issue, but if you get it, please be aware that that could be an issue, and that's how you solve it. Easily solved, but oddly annoying. Anyway, so the results of those two. The PS4, I ran Yakuza Kiwami, and to be honest, I didn't really notice a whole lot of difference. Kind of like the Xbox One, it improves, it smooths out a little, but it's not that bad to begin with. But when you put it on the PS3, you really notice a difference. I ran it with Infamous. This is with it. Without it, with it. It's a huge difference. So in the end, what I would tell you about this thing is it's a great piece of technology, but it has a couple of catches. And I use the word catches, but I really shouldn't. It's just kind of hiccups. This thing, while it's awesome, clearly seems to be at its best with just a handful of consoles, because it's mostly designed to take 720p content and kind of make it look much nicer, or 1080p content and slightly improve it. 480p content makes a big improvement. So there's only a few consoles within the wheelhouse of this device that really make practical sense. While Xbox One and PS4 see slight improvements, they are limited by the fact that this thing, when it comes to 4K content, straight up does nothing. It has absolutely no effect on 4K content, or basically no effect. So it's not useful for that. So Xbox One and PS4, while it will do something with non-4K games, the improvement is minimal. It really shines with the Xbox 360 and PS3 especially. It really helps those out. It has improvements very noticeably on the Wii U and the Switch as well. And that's kind of where you're limited to be honest, for most people. Because the consoles that come before it only work with the proviso that, you have an HDMI modified Gamecube. You have the various necessary HDMI devices for, say, a Dreamcast or perhaps an Xbox and PS2. Didn't get to test that personally. And going back to the 5th gen, while I didn't test, like say the Apple Pippin with it, I guess I could have. For the most part, there's not going to be much improvement there. The N64 slightly, but yeah, not really much else. And anything prior to that, it's really going to have no effect whatsoever. So the practical number of consoles is very, very limited, which is unfortunate. I would hope that they could make some sort of retro edition of this to kind of widen that. But at the same time, you got to think it's an HDMI cable. HDMI has only been in consoles really since the Xbox 360, so it's not surprising that that's where its focus would be. I'm just happy I could test it with some older consoles just to see what the results of something like that would be. With that in mind, let's take a look at this. This is the Dreamcast running through the Acura with a standard HDMI cable. And as you can see, it's displaying, my television says it's displaying in 480p, which is nice, that's what the Dreamcast outputs. However, if you connect the console with the MCable, you'll see this. My television now reports that the cable is running the console at 1080p. Now, a few things to note about that. Of course, what that implies is this cable creates upscaling effect. That's great, it upscales, but that doesn't really do anything. It's just kind of nice, it has a little bit of additional visual benefit, but really it just creates a couple of different, some pluses and some minuses. One of the pluses is that more monitors and more televisions and more capture devices will be able to interpret the Dreamcast. As it stands, a lot of capture devices specifically can't read 480p. This cable will fix that because then they'll be able to recognize 1080p. Now, it does create a couple of other issues though. Well, I should also say that it will allow a little bit of future-proofing down the line when 480p inevitably gets phased out of monitors and TVs. This will keep it relevant for a longer span of time. But the flip side of that, and the ironic flip side, is my capture software, as I mentioned before, isn't seeming to really handle this very well, or at least the hardware aspect of it isn't. But it also creates that widescreen effect. As you can see, that's not how the Dreamcast is supposed to look. That is not real widescreen. That's just the 4:3 image being stretched, and there's no way to disable this on the cable itself. Now, if you're just playing the games, it's not that big of a deal because most modern televisions, including mine, have the ability to adjust the frame so that it looks normal again. So you're playing at a higher resolution, you get the anti-aliasing benefits, and it just looks the way it's supposed to look. However, that does not apply to captured footage. If you capture footage that way, you will have to go into post-production and alter it back to its 4:3 state in order for it to look normal. Now, this also applies to later consoles. 720p content. I took the PS3, for example. Very infamously, I believe it's every single game on the PlayStation 3 only runs at 720p. So I popped in Yakuza 3, running natively with stock HDMI cable. This is what it looks like. That's what it says, running 720p. Did the exact same thing, this time with the MCable, upscales to 1080p. Same issues stick around, except that the PS3 already ran in widescreen, so you don't have that problem. It just kind of upscales, which is nice, but doesn't necessarily do all that much. The other thing is, I was told, as I recall on site, this cable will also take 1080p content and upscale to 4K. That's what I vaguely remember being told, but to be honest, I cannot test this because I do not own a 4K television. What about PC gaming? What happens with that? PC gaming, this doesn't have a whole lot of purpose because, to be honest, PC games can typically do that in software. They can create anti-aliasing effect and they don't really need this. Whereas this is really designed more for game consoles that don't have that ability. So if you want a modern console to use this with, the Switch is the real winner. There is one other thing I need to point out here. As I said I would mention before, I had a couple of, like I mentioned, I had issues with recording. The other half of that was that the way my recorder works is you take a cable, an HDMI input source, so you could think this cable plugs into my HDMI device, and then from the recording device, and from the recording device there's an HDMI output to your television. And then, of course, along the way, it passes a signal to a computer for recording. Okay, that's how it's supposed to work. So I thought the logical move is to connect, let's say, the Switch with this cable to the input of my recording device so that the captured footage would be pre-processed by the cable, and then any sort of duplicate footage that it sends back to the television is also pre-processed, right? No. It would appear the captured footage I got did not include that processing, and the output back to the television most certainly did not. Now, I don't know why that is. I'm assuming it's a limitation of my actual capture hardware, because I've noticed other channels didn't run into that problem. So don't assume that that's a widespread issue with the cable. That's probably more on my end, or at least with the device I happen to have. The other thing I tried to do with that though is I have various HDMI switch boxes. Basically a device where it's like you can take 4 input and do 1 output. That way you can have 4 devices connected to 1 television input, and then you just manually or automatically change on a box. And I thought, okay, I'll take this cable and make it the output. That way everything that runs through it will be cleaned up and processed. Not with the boxes I've got. None of them could work with this cable. I don't know why. So the only time I ever really got any use out of this in the most practical of sense for gaming was if I had a direct one-to-one connection from my console to my television, with this being the intermediate. No recording purposes, no multi-splitting, nothing. It just had to be directly connected. And when you did that with certain consoles, the results were fantastic. So I don't want to take that away, because I really do think this is an amazing piece of technology, and I actually do highly recommend it. I was very skeptical about this thing based on the pitch. I'm like, that sounded like, you know, bullshit, but no, it's really good. It's just that it has certain things you need to know. And hopefully there's an updated edition that takes care of some of these issues, as well as maybe makes it possible to use with more retro stuff. Though I don't really expect that, because the amount of people that would practically run like this with a FrameMeister is very minimal. But I did that shit. I did that shit so you guys could see what the results were. And unfortunately, the way it currently works, it doesn't have a whole lot of benefit to those. But in some instances, again, GameCube, Dreamcast, really nice improvement if you have the right setup. So yeah, that's about all I have to say on this thing. I want to thank the guys over at Marseille for hooking me up with this. I want to thank you guys very much for watching. Again, if you want to enter to win one, hashtag MCable plus whatever you want to write in the comments below, and use that coupon code in the description. Go ahead and save 10% off if you want to buy one of these things. The code will run through August of this year. After that, it will expire. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you all later.